In the darkest nights, we find our light. Battered souls, but we won't lose sight. Surviving together, never alone. Through every trial, we carry on. Surviving together, never alone. Through every trial, we carry on. Surviving together, we stand strong. United forever. Strength and courage will overcome. Oh, surviving together, victorious, and never alone. Hand in hand, we'll face the unknown.
We see you, we hear you, and we believe you.
Hey, everyone. How you doing? Welcome to my disaster of an office right now. You've landed on Surviving Together. Thank you for being here tonight. We've got a great interview with Kristen Pine, a trauma educator. And let me start with my intro first. Like, as you can tell, I'm just scatterbrained right now. Um, you have landed at Surviving Together, a safe space for trauma survivors to connect and build community on their healing journey, as well as providing trauma related education for all. I am doing this in landscape view, not the vertical view tonight. Let me know in the comments how many of you would like to also have the vertical view. I was looking at the analytics and it's showing that a lot of people who are watching on replay are watching in that vertical view, which means they're watching on their mobile phones. Problem we discovered is that you guys can't necessarily see each other's comments. So I think that, that's a YouTube thing. They've got to figure it out. And because I like you guys to be able to talk, right? So we'll see. But that's my thing that I want for you guys to do today is in the comments, let me know, do you want to have the option of the vertical view back? Okay. If you can, hit that like button before you leave today. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe, hit the bell, the all for notifications. That way you'll always know when we come on. And Crystal is here right now. It looks like Mustang Mike stopped by and wishing us a great show. So thank you very much. I know you guys kind of trickle in after everything comes live. And we've had a lot of people watching on replay recently. Seems like the majority. So we'll see how all of that goes. And if you didn't know, I put out a ton of shorts. Finally got a little bit of time to do that. So there's a ton of little shorts based on previous lives that I put out that you can watch. So without further ado, let me bring up Kristen Pine. Hello.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm great. So glad that you are with us tonight. Kristen is just a wealth of information. She is a subject matter expert on trauma education. She worked for 25 years with the YWCA, helped co-create a number of different programs with that. So we are going to be picking her brain tonight and finding out all about what she thinks about trauma education. So why don't you can intro yourself, whatever you want to say about yourself. And then I'd like to start out kind of like, how did you get into trauma counseling? How did you get into working with trauma survivors?
Yeah, so I kind of a second career, if you will, a little bit later in life, went back to school because I think I'm one of those folks that everybody just kind of tells their story to. So went back to school to be a therapist and was really looking to do some trauma work. I, at the time, really wanted to be a medical social worker. And so while I was in school, started to answer the YWCA sexual assault hotline and respond to what are commonly known as rape kits to help victims through that process. And I really got the trauma bug. I loved that work. And it was, so inspiring and so rewarding to help somebody on their worst day. So
Yeah.
I ended up doing kind of working as a clinician for about 3 years, kind of helping sexual assault survivors towards the end of that time frame, really focusing on men who'd been sexually assaulted as children. So really kind of dealing with kind of anger and trauma responses and how that was playing out in their adult relationships, and really loved that work. But one particular case really kind of got me working with the criminal justice field. This one client in particular would disassociate a lot, and was kind of getting in and kept getting criminal justice involved. Um, and so I was writing letters and trying to advocate on his behalf because he was clearly not consciously doing kind of these things. And then I really started to kind of get this kind of systems advocacy kind of concept of, I can sit in a room and help somebody one on one, but if I can get other people in the room and we can work on the system, wow, I can help hundreds, thousands of people. So I started what are called sexual assault response teams. So it really brings together forensic nurses, sex crimes detectives, advocates, really anybody who's responding to a victim, college folks, military folks, really kind of depending on where you are and what kind of happens in your community, and really talking about, can we have a very trauma informed response? Meaning, is law enforcement educated on trauma and trauma responses? Are folks getting the support so that they don't feel even more traumatized by reporting a sexual assault? So start
Yeah.
to do that
Yeah.
work. Yeah. I mean, and that is huge because it's the most underreported crime. It is incredibly traumatizing, just in the assault itself, and then to come forward and talk to strangers about that,
Yeah.
it's just so hard for folks. So really started doing that work and really looking at kind of that system advocacy piece and how we can help across the board. Um, and then that kind of led me down a road to at the end of my career, I had started a family justice center, which co-locates services for victims of crime, but particularly sexual assault, domestic violence victims, so they don't have to navigate the criminal justice system and where folks, all the places that you need to go, particularly when you're talking about folks, maybe that don't have a job with a lot of vacation or time off, maybe
Mhm.
people have little kids. And so if you don't have transportation, you don't have any of those things, it's really difficult to navigate. And a lot of people just don't. Right. So,
Right.
um,
Right.
so really worked on that and really kind of trauma education across the board. Right. So what I found in my 25 years is that whether you're a domestic violence victim, whether you're a child abuse victim, whether you're a sexual assault victim, that understanding what's happening biologically, what's happening mentally to you, and having people help you who understand that really makes the difference in somebody recovering from kind of, and
Yeah.
recovery is possible and
Mhm.
really obtainable, right? So
Mhm.
there's so many barriers for trauma survivors, and we put up so many kind of obstacles for them, that if you can remove the obstacles in your system, whatever system that is, right, your company, your university, your high school, your whatever, law enforcement, if you can remove those obstacles, not only do we get victims who kind of go through the whole process so that we have some offender accountability, which is
Mhm.
huge, but also kind of it sets the stage for that recovery, right?
Mhm.
So that's really where I spent my career and why I started my business. It was because this is my passion, and I really want to help others really kind of embrace that concept and really help people be able
Mhm.
to do that.
That's awesome. Um, you know, a couple of things that you said just really struck me. It's just kind of, getting bit by the trauma bug. And I think that um, for some of us who get into advocacy work, it really is, you get sucked into it and it really pulls to you and ignites that passion. It certainly did for me because I started in my serious advocacy work, later on, doing the exact same thing that you did, starting with the why, being a victim advocate for people who are coming in for their SANE examinations and getting
Yeah.
their rape kits done, and just being able to help those people at a time when they're feeling their most vulnerable, right? Um, was
Yeah.
so rewarding. It was interesting, and I don't even think this came up in our previous conversation. And I want to talk about it because we've covered it on the channel before, and it's this difference between female survivors and male survivors and what they need and where they are when they end up coming to get help and the things that they need help on. There seems to be um, I don't really want to say a division, but they're distinct needs
Yeah.
in terms of the anger and denial is seems to be so much more entrenched with the male survivors than it is with the female survivors. And so we've covered this difference before on the channel, and I just wanted to see if you could speak to that in your experience working with male survivors. What kind of things did you see, and what differences, from the female
I
survivors did you notice?
I think kind of female survivors as a whole, there's it's kind of normalized a little bit at this point. There's not as much as a stigmatism. There's this
Yeah,
idea of this, kind of the Me Too movement, or this sisterhood of kind of recovering from these things that you don't see in the male community, right? This is really still an incredibly taboo subject. um, and then the other piece is and I spent a lot of time working on this, and I think this will be something that needs to be worked on for a long time, is we all have our bias, particularly law enforcement, the criminal justice field, even the medical field, of men being victims, right? And
right.
so, when it's so difficult to talk about already, being a trauma survivor, whatever that trauma is, but then you have to kind of go forth and navigate a system that's not set up for men.
Yeah.
um, you know, and in my experience, a lot of kind of sex addiction, a lot of kind of denial, as you said, some of that kind of replaying the abuse and really kind of processing trauma in a very physical way, which is very
Hmm.
normal for men. Right? Men
Yeah.
and women are very different in how we process things, um,
Hmm.
and even how we're wired sexually, right? So to that shame involved that women don't have, that men really kind of internalize, we don't have a mechanism to normalize that. And
Hmm.
so and to really normalize that anger, right? Like, that's a piece that people don't like to talk about, and people are really uncomfortable with anger, even though it's a really, really rich feeling. I
Hmm.
always, when I hired new clinicians and it was kind of mentoring them, I was like, if you can get somebody angry, you can get somebody to move, right? So to really move through that trauma, because everybody, the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, that internalized shame and guilt, when you get somebody angry, that kind of goes away, right? You really get that person to focus on the offender accountability, and I didn't do anything wrong, this person did. But but so many people are uncomfortable with that anger. They don't know what to
Right.
do with that, right? Instead of really
And it's a
validating that.
feeling, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a feeling. At least they're because so many survivors will come to
Yeah.
recovery and their feelings are just all numb. Right? So if you
Yes.
can get that anger, at least they're starting to reconnect with their feelings again
Yeah.
and getting that. So I can see how important that is.
And it's a trauma response, right?
Yeah.
As much as somebody gets depressed, it's this the other side of the coin, right? So some people
Mhm.
really internalize and get that depression. Other people really get enraged. And
Mhm.
and a lot of people are like, whoa, calm down. And instead we should be being embracing that and saying, I'd be pissed too.
Yeah, yeah,
This is
exactly.
fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
So kind of normalizing that and really kind of embracing that um, is and embracing that as a trauma response and really normalizing that is huge,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, and then because
Whether it's
then you
male
can
or female.
help redirect it, right? You can
Yeah.
redirect that anger, and make sure that it's not an inward facing anger,
Right.
that it's an outward facing anger.
Yeah.
One of the things that and I would see if this is something that you experienced, or came across, is it seems that with females, no matter whether the abusers were male or female, just again, a smaller percentage of the population,
Right.
but there was not, for especially when you're talking about childhood survivors of sexual assault, there was not the prevalence of sexual questioning, sexual orientation questioning that there
Yeah.
seemed to be with the men.
Well, and again, men are wired very differently than women sexually, right? So, the majority of the clients that I worked with, and I think the majority, depending on age, um, a lot of young men, boys, become aroused and have orgasms as part of their abuse. And so that takes and to introduce that type of abuse and sexuality early is really
Right.
difficult for folks anyways, right?
Hmm.
Whether that's male or female, but then to have that happen to you where most females do not have that reaction, really,
Yeah.
that's really difficult for us to get in that mind space within an abuse situation. Not that that doesn't happen, because it does, particularly for long-term abuse, right?
Right. Yeah.
However, having said that, for most males, even the first time, second time, because they are wired differently sexually
Hmm.
than girls, that is a very common reaction to have an orgasm, and then it leads them down the road of, did I want this to happen? What does this
Yeah.
mean? About me? Does this now mean, if the abuser is of the same sex, does this mean I'm gay? Like, it just opens up so much questioning. And when you have any child who hasn't kind of had that normal kind of sexual evolution, if you
Yes.
will, of just the awkwardness and owning your sexual power and trying to figure out
Hmm.
who you are,
Yeah.
when sex is introduced so early, it's so difficult, and it really strikes the identity of the victim. And so for men, that can be really difficult.
I think it's so critical that we talk about, because I don't think it is spoken about enough, about our biology
Yeah.
and how much, just how we evolve naturally if you didn't have any of that type of abuse interference, and being able to, like you said, sexual evolution, be able to come into yourself and figure things out, having that introduced so early, it confuses, and it can rewire our brains. And I think this is something that's starting to be talked about more, especially as more people are becoming trauma informed, as more therapists are trauma
Right.
informed, and then being able to counsel from a trauma informed aspect. But
Right.
getting away a
Yeah.
little bit from just talking about feelings to talking about the entire person in
Yeah,
in
for
helping
sure.
somebody heal.
And again, that goes back to, and I mentioned it briefly, but even kind of the sex addiction stuff, right? Like, if I can't talk
Yeah.
to my partner about what my experience was, or if there's all this shame and guilt around that I feel like this is a part of me that I can't open up to, that
Hmm.
can be really damaging, right? So these are just really, and again, no matter, I would say this to my clients all the time. If I got in the car tonight and it was pouring down rain and I got in a terrible accident and, thought I was going to die, the next time I got in a car in the pouring rain, nobody would expect me to be okay, right?
Yeah.
But when you start to talk about domestic violence or physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, any of these types of things, people don't understand that, right? Who
Yeah,
have been through it, and victims really feel like they should be okay when what's
yeah.
happening is really normal, right?
Mhm.
And so we normalize in our society a lot of trauma that people can really wrap their heads around because it's, again, death or accidents or those types of things. But kind of these crimes that really happen kind of in the shadows that people don't want to look at, those
Yeah,
victims, unfortunately, are kind of stuck holding that, right? And so that's why trauma education is so important because it doesn't matter what your trauma is, your responses are
exactly.
really normal,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
What is happening to you is normal for you,
Yeah.
and it's definitely one of the things that we talk about a lot on this channel and try and get across is that while although there are certain common trauma responses, just because you
Right.
have or you don't have a particular response doesn't mean you're abnormal. You're not reacting properly,
Right.
Um,
So to go back to my analogy, if I get in the car and I can't do it, I don't feel broken. But
yeah,
if I'm having a trauma response with my partner because somehow I'm triggered about a sexual assault, then I feel broken,
yeah,
right?
something's
So
wrong.
yeah, taking those kind of that stigma away from that and really helping not just the victim understand that because that's huge, right? Because a lot of people
Hmm.
really feel like they're having a mental break or they can't will themselves through it when that's not
Yeah,
it's not feasible, right?
yeah,
When
exactly.
right, that's just not and the reactions are very normal. You're having a biological reaction to an abnormal event. That's what
Yes,
drama is, you know? And
yeah, definition.
right. So, that to really normalize that and then to try to again work through the systems to make sure other people know that. We talked kind of briefly before we came on, like in setting this up, but I feel like every HR professional in the entire world should understand trauma, right? People get triggered at work. Stuff happens at home, and so if you have the ability to say, hey, I'm a trauma survivor and I may have a bad day and I may need you to kind of help me out, and do we have a code word just for me to be able to call out sick to say this is a bad day, or if I have an ongoing situation, right, that's going on, if
Yeah.
I'm in a domestic violence situation or something, my child was sexually assaulted and I may have to stay home, like
Hmm.
a lot of times people in the workplace don't understand that, right? And are like, what do you mean? So, these are the places, what that I think we really need to really focus on this universal kind of education.
I think that is an aspect that I think if you were to speak to most people who are in a corporate world, for if somebody was to come up to them and say, hey, I think your organization could really benefit from being trauma informed, they'd be like, we're a corporate workplace. What are you talking about? I think that there is definitely a disconnect there between understanding what sexual violence, domestic violence, any trauma in that person's past, how it can manifest years later, right? I mean, you could be sitting at your desk and all of a sudden somebody walks by with that red jacket that was the
Yeah,
abuser's jacket. Oh my God. And all of a sudden you thought you were past everything. You've been to
right,
therapy, you're feeling good, you're back productive in the workplace, right? And all of a sudden, boom, you are just like sweating and panicking and having this reaction. And most corporate people I speak to, I don't think that even enters into their brain. They're getting better, I think, at seeing the employees as people, right?
yeah,
And trauma is such a huge portion are such a huge thing for such a large portion of people. Like you said, whether it's that person or whether it's a support person
For sure.
that they
Yeah,
have to
I mean, if
deal
you
with.
so if you kind of look at those adverse childhood experiences, those ACEs, right? Like,
Yeah.
so, you look at those things, and that includes some domestic violence, but really, and some sexual assault, but really it's a wide range of trauma,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And more than half of the population has an elevated ACE score, right? So that's a huge
Amazing.
part of our workforce. And so to not be trauma informed in what you're doing, again, talking about a corporate world, by the time you get somebody trained and up and running in your company, you've invested thousands of dollars, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to lose that person just because they have a trauma response that you don't understand
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense, right? One of the I can again, doing sexual assault work for many many years, one of the things I saw over and over again was women who had been sexually assaulted as children getting pregnant and being triggered all over the place, right? So
Yeah.
having that child, having all the anxiety, knowing that I'm going to have to go to the doctor, I'm going to be touched, all like so much, right? Like really,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of folks don't go for their OBGYN exams, their annual exams, because it's so anxiety producing. And all of a sudden, I want a family. To your point, I've done my work. I think I'm here. And then I have to go every week and somebody's going to touch me and I'm thinking about giving birth and I'm freaked out and I'm being triggered. And, my partner may get that, may not get that. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so, this is a really normal thing that happens in workplaces. People have kids. Right.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
to not even support that because you don't understand that. Right. So that's really where I think there are probably more people who are trauma survivors than people who are not. And we
Oh,
just don't
100%
normalize it.
agree.
Yeah.
100% agree. I think the most recent statistic I was able to find is they say about 65 to 75% of people will be a victim of some form of trauma in their life. And I think that that's low. I think really you could go 95% if you're saying some form of trauma, because who's not going to have a death in their
Exactly.
in their life of somebody close?
Right.
That is a trauma.
Yeah.
Some people get through it fairly easily compared to others, comparatively speaking, but it doesn't mean it's not a trauma. And I
Yeah.
think that that is one thing that some people look at when they're looking at trauma survivors and saying the event that was the trauma for that person, right? That's something that most people get through fairly easily. So they discount it as a trauma.
Yeah. If I had a bad car accident, nobody would blink at me if I said I can't come in because of this, right? You know, if I had been out of work recovering for 6 weeks and then I said to my boss, it's pouring today and I need to work from home because I just can't get in the car, somebody would, eventually somebody might be like, hey, have you gone to therapy, whatever, but nobody's going to blink at that. Somebody's going to be like, okay, we're supporting Kristen, right? She did
Hmm.
have that awful accident.
Right.
However, to your point, if I saw the red jacket come by, people are going to be like, wait, you know, what's happening there? And is that person okay? Right? We're gonna start to really kind of judge these responses. And to your
Right.
point, death, divorce, your children get sick. One of the most, as an executive in a nonprofit, one of the most traumatized individuals that I supported as a boss was somebody whose child had cancer.
Oh,
Um, and
yeah.
and so and eh, trauma is trauma
Hmm.
across the board, and how we respond to that doesn't make sense because our bodies are trying to keep us safe. Our brain is keeping us safe. We have a great, it's a little computer up there that works really well to keep us safe. And sometimes, in order to keep us safe, it shuts us down.
Yeah, exactly.
And
It's
how other people respond to that dictates how we respond, right?
yes.
So So when somebody gets shut down because they're dealing with their trauma responses, how your workplace responds to that, how your friends, your support system, those things all make, I would say, way more of a difference than a therapist or anybody else in how you recover quickly.
Oh, absolutely. We were speaking about this on another live, and one of the I was going through some research, and they were saying one of the main things that will depend on how well you're able to acclimate. Say you've got two people who go through the same near-death experience in a car, right? I mean,
Yeah,
they're both there, they're both passengers in the back, they have the exact same experience. You've got one person who's supported, their family is, making them feel safe and getting them any help that they need, allowing them to speak about it if they need. And then if you've got somebody else who's totally not supported, they're like, well, you made it out, you're fine, right? I mean, just get on with your life. Those two people are going to have very different short term and long term effects. And one
yeah,
person's going to be able to come out the other side fairly quickly, and the other person may not. And understanding
absolutely.
that and understanding those differences and being able to not minimize the trauma of the person who isn't handling it well, right?
Yeah.
I think is so important. So, like you talk about HR, I mean, just support from a workplace, but then, support from home. That's trauma education is so important for everybody, right?
No, kind of going back to what you were talking about and our shared experiences of responding to sexual assault victims during those same exams. I think the most important work um, during that time is not with the victim, but the secondary victims. Whatever loved ones are there, because
Hmm.
if your mom's there and she knows you've been sexually assaulted, she's going to take you home and treat you like you have the flu. I don't know how many times I've said to people, don't go home and make their favorite meal because you just made it the rape meal, right?
Yeah.
You're going to next time pot roast, right?
That's a reminder. Yeah. I hate mac and cheese now. Damn it.
I know, right? So I'm always like, let the person go home and dictate what they need versus you kind of jumping in and trying to take care of, because you can do more harm than you think you can, um, just by trying to support, right? So,
Yeah.
I think that education with loved ones, partners, and that is so key to providing the right kind of support, because you can have the best intentions,
Hmm.
but also really do some harm. And again, going back to that anger, the person gets anger and then angry and everybody's like, oh, calm down. And that's the worst thing you can say to somebody, instead of being like,
Yeah.
yes, let's get angry. You have a
What
lot
would
of
you
reasons.
Yeah, exactly. Don't shut them down. What would
Yes.
you say what are, say, your top three tips or whatever for people who want to support trauma survivors? What are kind of your key takeaways?
Yeah, my first one is make sure that person gets to make all the decisions, right? So I don't care what trauma you have. But when you feel out of control, and
Hmm.
every trauma survivor feels out of control, what happens is people see you hurting and they don't know what to do. So they
Hmm.
try to take your control away from you, try to take care of you. And instead, we should stop, and start to say, what do you need? In training new staff and training folks, this is a hard thing for us, right? But the
Yeah.
number one thing you can do with somebody is just to sit with their pain. You can't
Hmm.
take it away, right? So, don't try to pretend you know what it is, because you
Hmm.
don't, because everybody's pain's different. So
Yeah.
just sit with them and their pain. And sometimes not saying anything and just sitting with somebody and saying, I know it's really hard right now, and I'm here, is the best thing you can do for somebody,
Yeah.
you know? So, and we're such a society to try to fix things.
Yeah.
We want
Exactly.
to, yeah. I think the other thing is and Brene Brown has a great, like, a little video about this, but we want a silver lining everything too. So we want to say, well, at least this didn't happen, or at least that didn't happen. And when you're in
Yeah.
your trauma bubble and you're hurting, that's the last thing anybody wants to hear, right? So, kind of going back to that, just kind of sitting with somebody in their pain, letting them find the way forward, not putting a timetable on that. And then just kind of acknowledging that this really sucks, right? And
Yeah.
I'm here for you.
Yeah, people, I can see that so easily of, wanting to point out that silver lining, but what you're actually doing is minimizing that person's experience and
Yeah,
minimizing their feelings
for
in
sure.
regards to that.
Yeah.
Um, I would love for you to speak a little bit more in depth about the essay response team that you put together and kind of how that came together. Really explain all the pieces with that and where it ended up.
Yeah, so did that for, oh God, over 20 years. I'm aging myself. But really, I think that the starting point and the thing, oh, and somebody, thank you. The comments are popping up, and I want to make sure at the end that I get to answer any questions and acknowledge those. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Um, so one of the things that I have learned over kind of the years is that everybody thinks they know each other's roles, and they don't. So,
Mm,
particularly in the criminal justice system, in an ER, I don't care where you are, in a big system, everybody thinks they know all the parts and they don't. So, kind of what I did, and would do, depending on how much staff turnover we had, but at least every 2 years, most of the time every year, is get all the first responders in a room. So for sexual assault victims, again, those nurses who are going to do the exams, local ERs. If in my area, I have tons of colleges and military, so those folks.
mm-hmm,
Again, sex crimes detectives, child protective services, social services, kind of the folks. You got to kind of look in your system to say, where are victims disclosing? Who are they going to? Right.
yeah.
And then what you want is all kind of the leaders, the folks who can make decisions in the room. And what I would do is map out kind of what would happen for a common sexual assault victim. So, and like I said, in my area, I have a ton of colleges. So let's take a 19-year-old or an 18-year-old who's new to campus. Sexual assault on college campuses is an epidemic. It's just
Oh,
crazy.
yeah. Huge numbers.
So those numbers are just crazy. And then there's some federal laws around Title IX, and then if you have
Mm-hmm.
security on the campus, it gets really, really
Yeah.
confusing and complicated. And so you
Mm-hmm.
have a young person who's traumatized, who's away from home for the first time, and oftentimes the victim hasn't disclosed. It's often like the roommate or somebody else who's disclosed
Mm-hmm.
that this has happened, right? So you get the kind of leaders in the room and you talk through, okay, now what would happen? So this young woman comes forward, she was drinking at a party, she's sexually assaulted, she comes home and tells her roommate. So the roommate tells the RA, for instance. This is a pretty
Mm-hmm.
common one in my area. In most college
Yeah.
towns, this
Yeah.
is a pretty common sexual assault story. So then it'd be like, okay, so what happens next? What does the RA do? Who do they call? And I literally would get huge whiteboards or huge sticky things and make huge flow charts. And at the end of it, really kind of say, okay, now here's your piece and what did you do? And in doing that, what you really show is everybody in the room what happens that they don't know. So you're cross training without telling people they need training
Yeah.
because people don't like to be told they need training. Right. So you're kind of cross training. But then the other thing is there's this visualization of what happens to
Mm-hmm.
this victim. And at every time they have to tell their story, I usually make a star and circle it so that at the end, you can go through and count how many stars and circles you have to try to say, look, this is not only not trauma informed, right?
Yeah.
But it's traumatizing. Like in
Mm-hmm.
most systems that don't do this work, victims on average have to tell their story 8 times before they get a forensic
Wow.
exam. Mhm.
Wow. That I
Yeah.
would not have expected.
Yeah, so you have the initial kind of, and then you have police,
Yep.
and usually there's a step between the initial disclosure and then somebody else and then police. And then if you go to a hospital, you got to talk to triage, you got to talk to the nurse that puts you in the room. Then, an advocate's going to come out, and then the sane nurse is going to come out, and then a
Yeah.
doctor has to clear you, and then you put in law enforcement. So you put in all these folks, and here's this victim, and we lose them. They walk away. They're like, I can't do it. Right. It's too
Yeah.
much. Can you imagine? Right. And
Well,
so
you
the
involve the
idea behind,
university. I
yeah,
was to say you involve the university then, and you've got campus security, you've got,
yeah,
their
yeah,
law enforcement liaison, and it just gets really murky, and sometimes it just gets lost in that system and
for
doesn't get
sure.
over to the actual law
Yeah. If
enforcement.
you have security, or, like in my area, some of the colleges have their own police department. So the
Yeah.
people who are, you know, I'm kind of blunt, so forgive me, but the people who are busting the keg parties are also the people who are investigating sexual assaults. So a lot
Yeah.
of times people know those folks, and they're like, wait, you want me to tell you about this? And how much experience do they have really investigating these types of crimes?
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
this is, so it's a process, but then at the end of the process, you really kind of show how good your system is, or how many challenges your system have, where you need training, and then how you can streamline it, right? So the sexual assault response team ideally model is, very few people talk to the victim till you can get the sane nurse, the detective, and an advocate all together in a room. And so the victim only
Right.
has to tell their story once, right? And so the advocate's there to support the victim. Law enforcement's getting their information for what they needed to start their investigation. And the nurse is listening for where I need to look for evidence on the body, right? And people can
Mhm.
ask their questions, but the victim only has to tell their story once after that initial disclosure. That's that takes everybody, I use the analogy in these teams of, we're all going down an 8-lane interstate, right,
Mhm.
at 80 miles an hour, and it all works if we stay in our own lane. But if we start crossing, we're going to have a huge accident, right? So this is the ideal, but you have to get
Mhm.
everybody in their lane going, knowing their role, having the trust to know that this person's not going to mess up your role, your lane, not kind of weave over. And so that's kind of that work. And that's the ideal kind of, the outcome is everybody has their cell phone so they can call at 2 a.m. when it goes wrong, because it will.
Yeah.
And the trust to know that that person's going to pick up, um,
Mhm.
and kind of not that finger pointing, right? So, just this, okay, if it went wrong, it might have been my staff, it might have been somebody else. Is this a system issue, or was this a person issue too? Kind of, so
Mhm.
looking at
Right.
that. So
I
that's
you
kind of
know,
what that concept looks like.
I think that's amazing, and especially the visualization with the stars at the end so people can really see. And one of the things that struck me with it, and, you know, as somebody who works in the legal field and has seen victims just destroyed on defense because there is uh, such an emphasis on, oh, you didn't disclose this aspect, you didn't disclose this aspect. Well, the more people you talk to, the more chances of little inconsistencies coming out, but also just being able to understand trauma and trauma responses and how our
Yeah.
memory works, and that
Yeah.
we might not have all the facts in one order. So, yeah, I told the doctor this and I told the law enforcement person that. Uh, and all of a sudden, you've got 8 points that somebody can pick apart, right? And say, okay, your credibility shot because you weren't able to tell a consistent story. Versus if we can get that down and have that person feel comfortable, safe, and the space and the time to be able to just go through whatever they can remember at that point in time.
Yeah. The best detectives that I've worked with, and I train on this all the time, is understands trauma memory, And instead of
Mm-hmm.
asking for a linear account of what happens, instead just says, tell me what you can remember in that initial statement and waits for a couple REM sleeps and then says, okay, and tries to get a better, but really it should be very sense driven. That's where trauma
Mm-hmm.
memory is stored. So what did you smell? What did you hear? What did you feel? Those types of, you can get a lot more detail kind of with that line of questioning and investigating than you can with tell me what happened, right?
Yeah.
And so, that's, you're right. Victims just get eviscerated on stands because when you have law enforcement that comes in, or even a nurse that comes in and says, okay, and then what? And then what? The brain doesn't work that way.
Yeah,
Trauma is not
exactly.
stored that way. And so they'll answer because we feel like we have to, but it's
Mm-hmm.
often junk memory because it's just that's not how that part of the brain works.
I think that's so critical that you say that, for people who are doing investigative work or who need to, or medical, who need to get the story out for a particular reason from a person, that instead of coming at it from a linear aspect like you would for maybe, somebody was mugged, or I don't know,
Yeah.
something, property damage or something. When you're talking about a trauma, coming at it from a sense aspect, and how that just shows how critical education is for these people, to be able to come to an interview with an understanding of not only that this person has suffered, a traumatic event, but that their memory is going to be different, and that that they can give you the information, they can give you what they can, but it may not be your standard interview that you're used to. And
Right.
yeah, and I think that, in a lot of places with law enforcement, that's lacking. And I see them being more trauma informed, like just understanding that it's a trauma, understanding that we
Right.
need to recognize it and believe the victim, but coming at the investigation from a little bit different of an angle. I see that as a piece that could definitely be
Yeah. It's
improved.
the sexual assault and to some extent domestic violence are really the only two crimes where law enforcement comes and it's hinged upon what the victim says.
Hmm.
Every other crime, it's we're pulling cameras, we're talking to witnesses, we're doing other stuff, right? So, and I think it is getting better. I think there's I think people are having a better understanding of trauma and trauma responses. And unfortunately, some really high profile cases have come to light where people are like, oh wait, so
Hmm.
I think that's true. Um, I think it's also if you don't understand it and you don't know the right questions to ask, again, going back, if you don't have that education, if you don't have that training, and you don't know necessarily, it's probably not what you should be asking, but you don't know what to ask. That's
Yeah.
setting up them to fail too. And a lot of law enforcement really wants to be trauma informed. So,
Hmm.
I say this all the time, law enforcement has the hardest job in the world. I wouldn't want to be a cop.
Yeah, me
I
neither.
truly like, yeah, my hat's off to them, like to show up and again and again and deal with this. But when they're not given the right tools to even get the
Yeah.
information to be able to investigate, it sets up victims to fail and them to fail. So
Yeah.
again, this is the idea behind this kind of cross training and really looking at how you're responding. And again, mapping a system is not, it can be sexual assault. It can be somebody walking into an ER, even. This can
Hmm.
be domestic violence walking to HR to say, hey, I'm concerned for my coworker's safety because my husband's threatening to come and shoot up my work. Like
Yeah.
how you respond to these things, and universities, and like I said, the military, the hospital systems, OBGYN offices, HR in every field. How do you have it already set up so that you know how to have a trauma informed response to that victim? Because I don't
Hmm.
care where you work, Wawa, So,
Yeah,
like,
right. Yeah.
you know, and kind of in those environments, you often get a lot of victims in there because, particularly for domestic violence victims, they don't stay in jobs for a long time because of the violence and because they end up having to quit because of this stuff, right? So
Yeah.
those kind of industries where you have a lot of young folks and a lot of turnover, they really should be trauma informed because they're seeing a lot of trauma. So,
Hmm.
my soapbox, like I've said, like I
No, 100%, 100% agree. And we were just, you know, I mentioned before to you that, I've got a human trafficking series in the works, and I covered it just in kind of a high level, just bringing attention to numbers, and just kind of covered the amount of people who were rescued this year alone. And that's
yeah,
just it with the major operations that where
yeah,
there were double digits of people who were rescued, right? And
yeah,
one of the things that we were talking about with that was the need for service workers to be informed, because
yeah,
who is going to come across these people most often? People in restaurants, people in the grocery store, people in the airlines. I mean, these are,
yeah. Cleaners
these are
at
the
hotels,
people. Yep.
front
These are
desk
the people
folks at
who are going to
hotels.
have, yeah, a couple walks in and you have a woman who may not look terrified, but maybe is a little catatonic or
Right.
whatever, and being able to recognize that. So it just goes back to, as we were speaking, the need for everybody who could potentially be in contact with somebody who is a survivor, or a current victim, to
Yeah,
have education. And really, who is that everybody, right?
everybody. Yeah,
you know
yeah, for
Trying to
sure. School
get it out.
counselors, right? Coaches. I mean, yeah, I can make the argument for anybody. Tell me.
Exactly, exactly. 100%. Because whether it is you coming with in contact with a direct survivor, or somebody who's supporting a survivor, guarantee you've already done it in your life, right?
Yeah,
No matter
yeah,
what your age is or what your job's
for
been.
sure. Yeah, and
Um,
how you respond has a direct impact on how they recover.
yeah, and that's so important.
Yeah,
I just wanted to, in the time that we have left, two things. I wanted you to speak a little bit more about the Family Justice Center, because I think that is such a great idea.
yeah.
It's I've seen other places that have done this, but it certainly is not the norm,
It's
and
not the norm.
it
California has a
should
lot of
be,
them.
right?
That's where it started. For us, I didn't think I was being a mean boss, but I was. I had a brand new intern, and we had just mapped our whole criminal justice system. So we had a grant, we had a facilitator. I was on the criminal justice board in my city, and we were looking at domestic violence conviction rates. And what we saw was nobody came to court. Victims didn't come to court,
Yeah.
um, and victims weren't coming back to court for protective orders. They'd come for the first one, but then they wouldn't come back. So
Mm,
we really started to be like, why is that? So I had an intern, and I said, here's your scenario. I want you to go get these services. So it was like, go talk to police, get a victim advocate, go talk to a prosecutor, go to the courthouse, get a protective order. And and I said, I want you don't have transportation, you have to take the bus. Two
mm,
scenarios. One,
yeah.
one where you don't have kids. I want you to do it where you don't have kids. And then the second scenario is I want you to take a pretend kid to elementary school and then get on the bus, right? So figure out when the school started. So um, it took 8 days to do it without children, 8 working
Wow.
days. Yeah. And then with kids, it was over 2 weeks, 10 days when she was like, I really need to start working on my direct hours. Right. But what we found was the courthouse had a cutoff time for protective orders. So there was no way to get your kids to school, even if you had a car, and get to the courthouse in time to get that protective order because one judge wanted to golf 1 day a week. So he just made it
Yeah.
the rule across the board. And again, not intending for this to become a barrier, but it became a huge barrier. So people were just
Yeah.
right and left being turned away. And then
Unbelievable.
just being able to navigate all those systems, they were all over our city. So it was, and our bus system was not on time. So by the time somebody was able to go do that, so you can imagine if, even if you were working, let's just say I used Wawa, let's just say you had a job at
Yeah.
Wawa, you would have lost your job. You would have had to choose between
Yeah.
going
Yep.
to work or dealing with this, right?
Yep.
So we started looking at concepts and then found the Family Justice Center model that co-locates all the services in one place. So the
Fabulous.
YWCA was there, the Commonwealth Attorneys was there, police were there. We had a sex crimes detective, we had housing, we social services, so all those benefits. We had a sane clinic. So this really was kind of a one-stop shop for victims to be able
Amazing.
to come and get all the things. And really, all you're doing is just removing the barriers, right?
Right.
And then we were able to go and find a donor, very generous donor, because we knew we were going to have a lot of things that we weren't going to be able to use grant funds for when we got everybody together. So we got a very generous donation for a couple of years. So we were able to get Ring doorbells and track phones and all sorts of things so
Oh,
that when
wow.
someone came in, yeah. And so it's really the concept. We use the verbiage of build your team. So it really
Yeah.
was, here are all the services. It's up to you who you want to talk to. Obviously, if you want to just talk to confidential resources, you can. But what we found, and again, I was there for about 6 years before, or 5.5 years, but when I left, what we found was most victims wanted the whole team. They wanted
Yeah.
everybody working on their behalf. And it really did change kind of the whole system. And then kind of, if you look at a system and outlier systems, it was really easy to then kind of do outreach to other service providers where victims disclose, like the colleges, like the military,
Mhm.
and have them have one place to be able to refer to. So it's a really
Mhm.
cool model. Um, Again, it's, getting everybody from all those different kind of different lines of service to be in one culture in one place was,
Yeah, get
one
the
of my
buy-in
biggest
from
feats in my
everybody.
life.
Yeah.
But it's really, really cool. And they, the sheriff's office started a therapeutic summer camp for kids who'd been abused. And so, and they completely paid for it. So they went to, it's called Camp Hope. It's a great national model. So these kids go to sleepaway camp and have these mentors, and they come back each month and do some programming. And so, really kind of just processing trauma and being kids together,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
we have some amazing partners, and they do great work. And so, yeah, no, I love that model, and I love kind of that concept. If anybody's out there and wants it, I will help you set it up.
Okay. Yeah. Guys, if you're interested in getting something like that started in your area, please just let me know, or Kristen's information is in the video description as well. I think it's phenomenal because not only, I think most people, if they would think about that model, immediately would think about, okay, let's have somebody for counseling services, right? Let's have somebody from law enforcement, and of course somebody from medical. But I don't know that they would necessarily think, hey, let's have the social services here so people can get help with housing, with food, with,
Yeah,
getting out of their situation, and being able to, move forward without that partner,
yeah,
or um, getting away from an area that they're living in, which, is next door neighbor is the abuser, or, whatever their
yeah,
situation is. I think that that's such a critical part of
yeah. And it
putting a
really
model like
allowed
that
us not,
together.
yeah, it really allowed us not to have a one size fits all response either. So one of the things we did was really kind of assess for lethality within relationships. And
Mm,
kind of really kind of look at, okay, how scary is the situation? So if we had a perpetrator who was, strangling, who, uh, stabbing, shooting, we had prosecutors on site who handled only those cases. And those
Wow.
victims got tons and tons of services because we know leaving that type of relationship is deadly, right? So,
Yeah.
you
Very
know,
dangerous.
so, it was also one of those things where, you got all those folks together and you massed those resources together, and we were able to have a much greater impact on those victims.
Yeah, just exponential help to
Yeah,
that victim, right? And I can see because just as you were speaking about the difficulty of going to each of those places, now you've got people who are in physical proximity, and I would imagine it's much easier for them to be able to work together then and make sure that a case doesn't get dropped somewhere,
for
right?
sure. Yeah, and victim services all have the confidentiality issue, but when we're in the room with the victim and everybody else, that's shared information. It's not
Yeah.
confidential. And obviously, we want that victim to be informed of their rights and all of those things. But, I can't tell you how many times a law enforcement officer would walk in my office to be like, she's not answering the phone for me. Can you guys reach out? Or
Yeah.
I'm really concerned. Can I get one of your advocates? Can we go out and knock on the door? Or, I kind of want to check on the kids in school. So it was just this really kind of great response of wraparound services, even when kind of the victim
Mhm.
was like, I hear you and I want to do these things, but I'm scared to death. like,
Yeah.
and for real legit reasons, right? So
Right.
we had one client that we had 6 cop cars take her to court. Her
Wow.
her abuser had shot her, had tried to take out a hit on her from
Oh
court,
my
like
Lord.
from jail. Like it was a
Yeah.
legit, had trafficked her at some point. So it was a game related kind of very scary situation. And she was like, I'm not going, if I go to court, I'm gonna die. Right. So she got a whole posse to take her into court because, you know, that was going to be the difference between him getting out and potentially killing her,
Yeah.
or or
Right.
her going to testify and him going to jail, and he did for a
Yeah.
very long time, and so she
Well,
got her life back,
good.
so
You know,
that's huge.
just as you were talking about that with, I don't know, for some reason, it's just when you went wraparound services, it just reminded me of being, I would imagine that somebody who would walk into a center like that, where you've got all of these services right there and they're all at your fingertips, willing to help you would feel like such a whole person
Yeah,
versus having to go to this department for this and this department for this. To me, I can see, how some survivors, it just may segment their trauma and be like, okay, I got to deal with this for this trauma, and I got to deal with this.
yeah,
And it's just when you have that and you're being looked at as a whole person and your whole situation is being considered, that can remove a barrier to healing,
yeah,
to
for
being
sure.
seen, really truly
Yeah,
being seen, and not just, my case is just being seen or my
yeah.
feelings are just being seen. Does that
It's the
make
same
sense?
concept. Yeah, it's the same concept of the sexual assault response team, right? And putting all the people in the room so the person only
Mhm.
has to tell their story once. It really is saying, we know this is incredibly traumatizing what's happened to you, and we're going to meet you where you're at. We're going to give you all the resources and you decide. And
Mhm.
sometimes that victim, I just need to move. I can't tell you how many bus tickets, plane tickets, it was like, I can't stay here because if I stay
Yeah.
here, something bad's going to happen to me. And so that was the answer. So we may have only talked to that victim as the team once, and then we bought a ticket and got him out.
Mhm.
And maybe they didn't come back to go to court, but we knew they were safe, right? So
Right.
safety and trauma informed and safety, victim safety has to drive all of these processes. So
Yeah, that's critical. Um, I do want to speak next, just kind of about your new company and the direction you're taking with that. But I just want to highlight a couple of comments here
yeah,
before we
let's do
do.
that.
Um, Crystal says anger was a really hard one for me because I grew up that anger was wrong. How many of us that happened
Yeah,
to? Not
Yeah.
now I'm okay with my anger, just learning to deal with it properly.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean, anger is a really strong emotion, and many of us were raised not being comfortable feeling angry, right? So and how many times as parents, I have 3 kids, and you know um my kids always laughed because other parents would be like, you need to calm down, I'm going to take that door off the hinge if you slam it, where I'm like, slam the door, tell me,
yeah.
like, sure, be angry. Yeah, because I mean, tell me why you're angry. All right. Let's have a
Yeah.
conversation. It's a really normal reaction, right? So when it's not this taboo reaction, then you can really work through your anger in a healthy way, right?
Mhm.
What am I really feeling? What am I really angry about? And when we're talking about kind of interpersonal violence and anger, it's often because somebody was took my control away, did something really awful to me, and of course
Mhm.
you'd be angry about that, right? Like, you
Mhm.
should be angry. So really validating those feelings. But yeah, but it can feel for a lot of people out of control. And it can be. A lot of people can get enraged and in that. And so you have to do it in healthy ways. But first you have to normalize it, so that when it happens, it doesn't scare people. And if they are feeling out of control, or if they are kind of losing their temper to the point that they can't think rationally through that,
Yeah.
then really understanding that that's a trauma response. And before that happens, how can I get grounded, right? So those
Mhm.
coping mechanisms, those grounding techniques, to really
Yep.
get that to a level where you're feeling the anger, but you're not out of control. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's such a critical point that you made, that anger really can be that opening for discourse, right? That
Yeah.
opportunity to have a conversation. And I think about this especially with kids, because how many, literally, like you're saying, you're opposite of most parents, it's like, gosh, calm down, just don't yell, don't, we just want to placate, we just want to bring the
Yeah.
emotion down immediately. Whereas that person may be angry about the fact that they can't have that snack, but what they're really angry about is something totally different.
Yeah.
And, how many
Yeah.
conversations potentially could we uncover some trauma that they're going through, whether that's
Right.
sexual abuse or whether that's bullying at school, or, if there's something underlying all that anger.
Right. And kind of, anger, and then this enraged trauma response, right? Which are very two different things. This enraged
Mhm.
trauma response really needs to be kind of looked at as, what are my triggers? How do I feel in my body when that's happening? How can I ground myself? So those are very two different things. Um, but really, one's a trauma response, and one's really being angry because this happened, or because this is going on, or because, so those are two different things, both based in trauma.
Yes.
Right. But it's the same thing as somebody dissociating too, right? So Kate's, kind of getting enraged and having that or dissociating and not having that. That's like the extreme of this trauma response. And so really
Hmm.
kind of learning your body and feeling that coming, and being able to ground and yourself in that, so that doesn't happen, is really important. So for
Hmm.
trauma survivors, because it can feel really out of control, right? So
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I want to highlight Indigo's comment, and I think that this is important, and because even people who we consider, educated, that, you know,
yeah,
doing their own taxes doesn't scare them. Um,
right.
the legal system can be very convoluted, right?
Yeah,
And I can only imagine for somebody who doesn't have some education, who doesn't have that knowledge behind that, how imposing, or not imposing, just how scary that can be. And Indigo says, I was curious about the legal aspect of these cases, how it worked. I didn't end up taking my ex to court for the abuse or the assault, but I might have if I'd known how to navigate all of that.
yeah. I think victim advocates are the most underappreciated and underutilized positions in our in our world, really, and at least in our country. Most programs, even at the courthouse, most of them have victim advocates, but nobody knows what a victim advocate is. And so even when folks, after an assault or abuse, kind of in the situation that you're talking about, when somebody says, "Do you want an advocate?" Nobody even knows what that means.
Right. Yeah.
So I always, how we changed our system is you don't get asked, you just get one. You can say, "I don't want you."
Yeah.
But that person's role is really to educate you on the process, to
Mm-hmm.
make sure you are the one driving the bus, that the system isn't driving the bus for you, and
Mm-hmm.
really help you identify what justice is, right? Because justice for one person may just be a protective order so this person leaves me alone, versus I don't want my
Yeah.
abuser to go to jail because this is going to make it worse, or we can't pay the rent, or I'm going to have to co-parent, right? There's lots of reasons why people don't leave. And so
Mm-hmm.
being able to, in a very trauma informed way, say, "This is not my decision. This is your decision, and I'm here to
Yeah.
support you, but I'm here to educate you on the process and what your rights are." That is
Yeah.
huge. And that's what a good victim advocate does. And so, again, goes back to trauma training and making sure they really
Mm-hmm.
understand the process so they can help. But yeah, that's where we end up losing people in the process, why people don't
Mm-hmm.
come back, why people won't show up for court, is because it is daunting, and it's a machine. It happens around
Yeah.
you, right? So, that's why I think victim advocates are just amazing people, and should make, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars, even though they don't.
Yeah. Exactly. I think maybe 5 years ago, who is focused on just helping people navigate the legal system. And, one of the things you had said there is that, justice looks different for everybody. And I think there's a natural tendency to want to say, well, this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
And we're trying to help, right? What your meaning is these are your avenues, these are the steps
Yeah.
that you can take. But when you use that language, say this is what you need to do, again, you're taking that control away from that victim. You're saying, I know what's best for you, and
Yeah.
what you're doing isn't good, right? Where
Yeah.
no, you may not end
Yeah.
up agreeing with what their decisions are, but it's their decision to make.
Yeah. And when you look at the domestic violence
So
statistics
critical.
that a victim will leave on average 7 to 10 times, the first time you say this is what you should do, you lose that victim, right?
Yeah.
Like it's their journey, it's their decision, it's their life. And sometimes it's hard to watch because you're really concerned something bad's going to happen to them. But it's still their journey, and they need to make those choices.
Yeah. I'm just gonna highlight this from Misha, and I just to send hugs out. Let's send hugs and love out to Misha. It looks like she's really having a hard day and struggling a little bit today. So um, sending
Yeah.
sending everything out for you. Um,
Yeah.
Misha
And
had a hard
what?
time, and her daughter. She's been going through the court system because her daughter was uh, murdered in a domestic violence situation, and so she's been trying to navigate that whole situation and getting justice for her daughter. And she just said here it's been going on 3 years. Um, and there just aren't a lot of support services in her particular
In her
community,
community.
which
Yeah.
yeah, which
Well,
is
if
just a
if
shame.
I can help in any way, let me know. Even if it's just kind of talking through it, and no, unfortunately, you're not alone out there. And
Mhm.
sending lots of love and support and healing energy your way. And um, your daughter is not forgotten. I promise.
So appreciated, so appreciated. Um, So let's end this by tell me about what you are doing now. You just started, you got out of retired from the YWCA
Yeah.
after 25 years and decided, you know what? I'm going to start my own company this year.
Yeah, I did. The things I didn't after a long time. My kids are all out of college, and running 2 24-hour programs was a lot. So we had a shelter and a hotline, and folks going out 24/7, and so lots of phone calls, and it just got to be too much. And I really, if you guys can't tell, this is what I'm passionate about. So I wanted to have a bigger impact, not just in my community, but across my state and across the nation, and helping people recreate what I've done here. So really kind of coaching. Kind of coaching other executives and how they can support their team and how they can work with community partners to do just this. Helping some with grant writing and grants management. That makes or break agencies, but it's really kind of
Yeah.
like really can be very difficult to navigate. Lots of trauma consulting, so kind of mapping, like we talked about, right? So going into systems and mapping, working with HR departments to say, what is your response? Do you have policies? So that when a victim comes forward, it's not the first time they're dealing with that. And so they don't traumatize somebody or make it harder than it needs to be. And then lots and lots of education. So kind of that's where I'm at right now. A little bit of direct services and helping folks as I can, but really kind of working on that systems advocacy piece and helping people kind of make sure that their communities and their organizations are trauma informed.
That's awesome. Can you tell everyone, so what is the name of your company?
Integrated trauma solutions. So integration is kind of a clinical word, but the
Yeah.
idea is that you integrate the trauma into your life, right? So integrated trauma solutions is helping systems, whatever that is. Yeah. So again, any organization whatsoever really integrate their response to a trauma survivor. So and then yeah, like I said, I'm just out here doing the things.
I I think it's wonderful. You've accomplished so much in your career so far, and the work
Thank
that
you.
you are doing now with your new company and the direction that you're taking and the people that you're trying to reach, I think are um, a lot of groups that haven't really thought in general about being trauma informed. I mean, think about how much time we actually spend at work, right?
Yeah.
And not to not, or like, let's flip it around. Let's go positive, to have that support, right, at
Yeah.
work, and it be, a place where I need to work from home today. I just can't be around other people, and to be able to have that flexibility and have them understanding it and not have your job be at risk.
Yeah. I hate the phrase work life balance because we take our life to work and we take our work home. Right. And
Yeah.
so, in order for us to be productive employees and productive family members or, friends, whatever, we have to be able to manage both. And sometimes work impedes on our personal life, and sometimes our personal life impedes on our work. And again, going back, these companies spend so much time investing in these folks, and sometimes people just need a little extra support.
That's awesome. Well, Kristen, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been
No
such a
problem.
wonderful conversation. I know that we'll probably have a lot of people listening on replay. So if you have any further questions for Kristen, you can reach out to me, surviving together, sass@gmail.com, or you can find Kristen's information in the video description and be able to reach out to her directly. So thank you so
Thank you
much.
so
I
much.
will actually be probably hitting you up here in the future, because sexual assault in the military is actually another series that I'm doing. I'm
Okay.
researching that behind the scenes right now. So I will probably be in touch to pick your brain a little bit about your experiences working with your military liaisons. So
Sounds good. I
this
can't
will
wait.
definitely not be the last time that we talk. So thank you so much.
Thanks,
Everybody
everybody.
else, hang on a second and I'll give our final announcements. All right,
All
Kristen.
right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Night.
All right. Good night.
All right, guys, that was wonderful. She is just such a wealth of information, and you guys know how passionate I am about trauma education and how I feel about it. And that is not only for trauma survivors, but it is for absolutely everybody. Whether you are a survivor yourself now, whether you've supported somebody, you're probably going to come in contact with somebody who's going to be a survivor in the future. So knowing this information ahead of time is just so critical in being able to properly support people. And I think the conversation that we had surrounding work and having HR or whoever is, in charge, your supervisor, having those people be trauma informed so that you feel supported, so that you're not feeling like I have to ignore what's going on inside my body right now with this response because I have to be at work or I'm going to be fired, right? Being able to take that away, I think it allows you to be able to take a step back, do your grounding techniques, get through what you're getting through, what you're going through, and then being able to try and, be productive in some form of or fashion during the day. So just absolutely wonderful. Again, guys, I want to remind you two things. One, let me know in the comments, is just having this landscape view good with you? Or do you want to have the vertical back? As I understand it right now, if I have both the vertical and the landscape view streaming at the same time, if you're in one view, you're not able to see the comments of the people who have logged in or are viewing in the other view. So that was the issue. That's why I've gone back to the single. I don't know if that's a YouTube issue. I don't know if that's a me issue. If anybody knows, please email me. If it's a me issue, I'd be happy to try and fix it. And Misha is saying, please don't simulcast. It's a nightmare for the mods. Um, So it's interesting because Restream, I just got an email yesterday that says Restreams. It goes, we've got two, you can do vertical and landscape at the same time. And I don't know if their setup is any different, if it's any better, but uh so far I'm still with this way. So we're gonna stick with landscape for now, unless I hear differently. If there's a lot of people going, I would watch, but you're not in vertical, that might sway a decision, and we'll see. I gotta imagine I'm not the only one who's having this issue, that YouTube's gonna have to fix it. Because if you guys could see each other, that would be awesome. Because then you could choose which one you did and you could see. So let's pray YouTube actually gets their heads together and fixes this issue. The next thing I want to remind you guys is we are live this Saturday, and it is the first Saturday of the month. And you know what that means? It's Laugh Saturday this Saturday, guys. Now, I do also want you give me your input. If you're still with me here, if I was to move the time, we're normally live at 3 p.m. Eastern. If I was to move the time to noon or 5 p.m., which would you prefer? I've got some people who would like to be here, who would be guests on the show, who I think you guys would get a great kick out of, but they can't do the 3 o'clock. So I'm looking at moving it possibly to one or the other. Um, so let me know. Would noon work better? Would 5 work better? Do you not care? Really interested on any of your input in regards to that. At this point, we're going to stick with 3 p.m., but stay tuned. I will definitely put a post up if we move the time. But you guys absolutely join us, because not only is it Laugh Saturday, it's December finally, which, if you've been listening to me for the past few months with Laugh Saturday, you know that it is finally Dad Joke December. So bring your best dad jokes with you, or just bring your sense of humor and groan and moan along with the rest of us at these awful, 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 great dad jokes. It should be a lot of fun, and I'm really looking forward to it because this is something that we have been waiting for, right? So, Dad Joke December right now, 3 p.m. Eastern. If the time changes, I will certainly let you know. Thank you, Misha, for reminding me. Please hit the like button, the thumbs up, show some love. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. If you're not getting notifications, make sure your bell is checked to all, because if it's on personalized and you haven't personalized anything, you're not going to get our notifications. So just a reminder on that. And if you can leave a comment after the show, that would be great. It really, really helps push the show out to people who may not otherwise get it in their feed. So thank you so much for your input, Kristen. Crystal, I appreciate that. All right. With that, I will say good night to you all. I have dinner to take out of the oven, and David is here. We are going to enjoy some pot roast that's been cooking for the last few hours while I've been on the show. Remember, you are worthy, you are valuable, and you are loved just the way you are for who you are. So, hugs and love from me. You guys have a great rest of your evening, and I will see you Saturday for some dad jokes. Have a good night, all. Enjoy the outro. Surviving together, never alone.
Through the fire, through the rain, we have walked through endless pain. But we stand, we rise again. Stronger now, we break the chain. Surviving together, hearts open wide, lifting each other through every tide. The past may have shaped us, but it won't define. Together we heal, together we shine. Every tear, every scar tells the story of who we are. Not just survivors, but warriors too. With love as our armor, we see this through. We see you, we hear you, and we believe in you. Surviving together, hearts open wide, lifting each other through every tide. The past may have shaped us, but it won't define. Together we heal, together we shine. We see